get started. And apparently I need to be clicked on that slide.
And I'm Kelly. I started out my career as a student success lecturer and librarian at an open access university where I worked predominantly with adult learners. And now I'm at Beloit, where I mostly do instruction, workshops, and programming that's geared to engage our students.
And I am Michelle Holshoe-Simmons, and I teach at Monmouth College. I'm in the Educational Studies Department, but I was actually at another of the ACM schools a number of years ago at Cornell College as a librarian, and I'm delighted to see friendly and familiar faces from Cornell from my years there. So I'm glad to be with all of you.
And I'm Haley, also a student success and engagement librarian at Beloit. I've been here almost a year, and I do a lot of reference instruction, but also electronic resources and outreach and marketing. So before coming to Beloit, I was actually at another liberal arts institution outside of ACM, but I was at Lynchburg University, or University of Lynchburg in Lynchburg, Virginia. And there I did a lot of things with digital humanities and kind of workshops on tools of digital pedagogy. And I was also a member of the Teaching and Learning Center, where we reviewed online courses. So this is really a topic that I'm very interested in. So now we want to know a little bit more about you. So we're going to use kind of a polling feature in Zoom to collect some information about kind of you and your role in the community, kind of what you do on your campus to build community. So if you've never actually used this function before, it's super intuitive. It's a good way to keep students engaged during a synchronous class. And you can actually kind of pre-add in your multiple polls and then activate them at any point in your lecture. So we have medium confidence going into this about building community in the class and outside of it, which is excellent. So let's move to our next question. So we're going to start by posing the question, why do students choose a liberal arts college? And you can kind of take a second and brainstorm and put your notes in the chat. But we want to kind of talk about why we're here. Okay, awesome. So we're getting in some good feedback in the chat. So words that are kind of standing out include flexibility, discussion, creativity, community. Essentially, our students choose to come to liberal arts institutions because we're student focused. So we value creativity, global perspectives, interdisciplinary studies. We teach critical thinking and problem solving skills in kind of a variety of methods, including, real life application, service learning, community engagement. And this kind of offers students a wide variety of career paths. So you can come to a liberal arts institution and you can be in athletics, you can be the lead in a theater production, and you can be a high academic achiever. There's really no limit to the number of things you can be involved in. There's a lot of opportunities there. So, eek, something is happening. Okay, so why did we choose to start here? Well, the way that we respond to planning and executing courses this semester is going to define our institutions going forward. This spring, we made a lot of really fast decisions. We did the best we could with kind of very little time to prepare. And I think we accomplished something that we can ultimately be really proud of. We ventured into new, unknown territory, tried new things, and we made it work. We made it through the end of the semester. So no, it wasn't perfect. There were things we could have done differently, but ultimately it was a growth opportunity for us. Now we have some time, not a ton of time. We have a little bit of time, And that kind of provides us with a chance to reimagine and redesign our courses. And when we do that, we can do that with the intention of making students feel more connected to us, to their peers, and to our institutions. And the reason why this is critical is for retention. So if you've been reading the Chronicle or Inside Higher Ed, you know that they're kind of predicting major sweeping changes in the higher education industry. So it's really critical that we move forward with the intentionality of maintaining campus culture, student affinity for our institutions, and kind of growing excitement and momentum for our brands. And every single person on our campus has a role in this. So in order to do all of this, we need to think to the past before we can go forward. So does anybody here have kind of an obsession with HGTV? I think Kelly's maybe laughing at me a little bit, but I do have kind of a borderline unhealthy obsession with HGTV. And something I've learned from watching that is that when you're building a house, you need to start with a really strong, solid foundation. If you don't have that foundation, your house is going to crumble. So when we are building a community, we need to make sure that we have that strong foundation. And this means maintaining relationships with our previous students. So alumni play a really important role still on our campuses. They represent our institutions, they play a role in recruitment, they serve as models for our current students. So here at Beloit, we've actually recently launched a channels program, which helps students kind of translate their academic career into kind of their desired career path. So for example, a political science major may want to do something in environmental policy as a career. So they might be part of our sustainability channel. And as part of that, we can connect them with alumni in that field to kind of mentor them. So kind of a note about the class of 2020, these students are very much still a part of our campus family. And a lot of them did not get closure at the end of the semester. A lot of them are still kind of seeking guidance from us. So take an opportunity, reach out, see what kind of things we can do to help them because they're part of our community. So once we've engaged alumni, we've built that foundation. Now we need to kind of ensure student success until things go back to normal. So these are the students that are on our campus in the fall. We need to keep them engaged both in the classroom and kind of as part of our institution. So the most critical thing for this is making sure that we keep students on track to graduate. So we don't want them to lose any time kind of as we go through this weird kind of period. So if we can keep these current students enrolled, engaged, enthusiastic, future students are going to come, and that's kind of how we kind of maintain our schools. So now we're going to look at some strategies for building campus community. So last week in one of my breakout groups, we talked a little bit about co-curricular and third space learning. And I think some of us rightly have concerns about how that's going to happen when we're doing things at a distance. We know this is a really critical element of a liberal arts education, and unfortunately, at least I haven't found one. I don't think there's a one-to-one replacement for in-person human interaction, but there are things we can do to make our students feel more connected to their peers and to the institution. So we can encourage them to attend virtual events, stay active with their teams and friend groups. In the fall, we don't really know, well, we might know if students are going to be on campus. We can assume that some of them will not be, no matter how we come back. We don't really know if we're going to be able to hold in-person events or what that's going to look like. But there are departments on our campuses, think Campus Rec, Res Life, the library, student groups. They're doing things, working really hard on programming. So typically students get emails about these events, but you can kind of extend personal invitations. They're more meaningful and students are more likely to take action when a professor says, hey, here's an event you might like, you should check it out. So you could try something like saying, you know, hey, did you see the Powerhouse team has a Facebook group? They're giving away free t-shirts on Fridays, check it out. Or did you know the library is doing a summer book club? I really am excited to read Little Fires Everywhere. Leisure reading is important in the summers. So you could do something kind of, it takes no time to do that. Or you could do something a little more involved. So in April, we held a community day, which is typically the day where students present their kind of big research presentations. And we translated this online by kind of incorporating pre-recorded presentations. There were virtual tours of campus, classes you could sit in on. There were games and live Zoom sessions. To build something like this into a course, you could say, have students watch a presentation and then write a brief reflection. This could also be a good extra credit assignment. Another example of this is before finals, the library hosted a night against procrastination. So some faculty encouraged particular students who were having problems with citations or resources to stop by. Other faculty kind of participated by setting up like a review session within our event. So the students in the review sessions actually came back multiple times throughout the day. And I think what Kelly and I both found during this event is that some of our students really just wanted company while they studied. So if your library doesn't have an event like this, you could do something similar in your course by just having a Zoom link open and encouraging students to use it whenever they want to study together or do a review session or just kind of hang out. So this could be nice for the whole semester, not just during finals week. So another thought is bringing students to campus virtually. So in the fall, a lot of us are facing situations where some students are going to be in residence, others are going to be online. And there are ways to virtually incorporate little bits of campus into our courses. So this could be something as simple as, you know, posting a picture of that crazy squirrel that we all have on our campus, video of your walk to your office that day, a picture from the farmer's market, something like that. You could post to a discussion board and just kind of ask students what they're looking forward to when they come back, what they miss. You could incorporate kind of little nods to campus into your lectures. So you could start each lecture by saying, you know, it's a great day to be a insert mascot here. You could start something really quirky like a fancy Friday where everybody gets dressed up to come to Zoom sessions. These are just kind of fun ways to kind of build community. And there are kind of assignments that you can do that kind of play into this as well. So you could create an assignment that revolves around the campus or the community. So an example of this might be a photo essay. So send students out into the community, have them sit for a little bit, reflect on what they observe. If some students are on campus, they're probably going to go take pictures of campus. Other students are going to be elsewhere. So it's kind of a fun way for students to learn about where their classmates are and kind of a nostalgic way for people who are not on campus to kind of revisit in a visual way. So I really like an assignment like this because it can be low stakes, but it's really creative. Students get the opportunity to kind of explore their own unique voice and incorporate multimedia into their writing, practice writing for the web, which kind of uses a different skill set from what we're normally talking about in academic writing. Assignments like this also help students build confidence in their writing, which makes it a really great exercise for the beginning of class. So I actually have a prompt that I use that works pretty well for an assignment like this. And if anybody's interested, I can share it on the Slack site after our presentation. You could also incorporate primary sources from the college archives or even articles from your local news into the course. So just a note, if you're interested in using archival sources, contact your archivist like today. It takes some time to gather and identify and digitize these items, getting them ready for an online setting. So you could also invite other departments on campus in as guest lecturers, encourage students to make appointments with departments like career services, the library, the writing center, tutoring, and kind of inviting and including familiar faces from campus can make students feel more connected. So now is a really good time to invite librarians into your class to talk about media literacy and evaluating sources, for example. And if you can't dedicate class time, maybe you've kind of reduced to a 7.5 week kind of module. There's still resources that these departments can provide to you that you can build into your LMS. So now we're going to kind of switch our focus to building community specifically in the classroom. But first, Kelly's going to tell us a little bit more about hybrid sources.
Okay, sorry, I was busy typing in the chat. So most simply, a hybrid course is a course built with an interactive or online component. In a hybrid course, the learning management system is used as more than just a repository for a syllabi or drop boxes and files. So throughout this presentation, we're going to discuss how to weave these characteristics into your hybrid courses this fall. There are 5 defining characteristics of a hybrid course: emphasis on active learning and problem solving, student ownership of learning, student-centered. There's a focus on inquiry and dialogue and support from technology, but the courses aren't necessarily driven by it. So the other sort of high word that's been thrown around a lot in the past few weeks and months is high flex. Personally, I went from hearing about this only in the education library I worked in grad school, but now I'm seeing it like everywhere. So high flex refers to a course where students can synchronously join into a lecture or discussion while they're remote. And the student should have as close to the same experience as possible while they're off campus. And creating these types of classrooms takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of money to get the right kind of technology and hardware so you can actually capture it well. And we're not going to focus on a high flex classroom because there's a ton of variation within our schools. Some schools have chosen to not use high flex at all. Other schools already have an infrastructure for it. And some schools are kind of just dipping their toes into the water, so to speak. But I would recommend reaching out to IT folks if you have questions about how they're planning on integrating it, or if they are going to integrating it, or if they are going to integrate it. We're focusing on hybrid classrooms because they're a little bit more realistic for the fall, and they rely on technology that we already have or that's free. Okay.
What I'd like to do next is have us think about building community in our classrooms. And first, I'd like to have us all type in the chat, if you would, what are students' expectations, first of all, in a face-to-face course? What are students' expectations in a face-to-face course? So if you can just type in the chat. I see co-construction of learning. I see discussion, robust discussions, instant feedback, community, knowing each other's names, lab activities, lots of great responses there. I'm going to have us pause, and I'm going to have you switch to what are students' expectations in either a hybrid or an online course. So switching gears here, what are expectations in either an online or a hybrid course? So things like different kinds of discussions, hands-on activities, flexibility. I think that's a really important one. Convenience, time flexibility, and space flexibility. Video lectures, self-paced, lots of communication, less content. I think that's interesting. Ability to rewind, perhaps on a video. They don't know. I think that's a really important one too. A lot of students don't necessarily have expectations for a hybrid or online course if they haven't taken one in the past. So let's just take a look at a few of the things that Kelly and Haley and I kind of were thinking about with both a face-to-face and hybrid course. Things that you all brought up. First of all, in a face-to-face course, students are expecting a high touch environment with active learning, active discussions. They want those close associations or interactions with faculty. Going back a few slides to the reasons that students come to a liberal arts college, they want close interactions with faculty. I noticed somebody in the chat said they want the faculty to know their name. Absolutely. And they want to work collaboratively with their classmates. And then in a hybrid course or an online course, there are also advantages. And I think that we don't want to think of this as the face-to-face is has all the advantages and the hybrid or online is lacking in every way, because there are advantages to the hybrid or online. And many of the things that you mentioned are the things that we were thinking about as well. Students have to be quite independent in a online environment or a hybrid environment. There are the discussion boards, but they're a different type of discussion, and it requires a lot of writing skills that maybe they hadn't needed to use as much in discussions in a face-to-face environment. Flexible both in schedule and location. Students can be perhaps all over the world if you have international students, or all over the country for domestic students. Some students are going to be on different time zones, and so we need to be flexible in schedule. And of course, it is essential that we provide feedback, because that really is where the learning happens, is feedback through assignments, through discussions, and so forth. So when we think about building community in either a face-to-face or a hybrid or online course, we really need to take the best of both of those environments and apply those characteristics. So we have to really think about what are the things that build community in a face-to-face course, and figure out how we can do that in a hybrid or online course. And those are some of the things that we're going to be talking about in the next few minutes. So just a few things to keep in mind: that trust is essential in building community, and it takes time. And so reinforcing through every single class the trust and that sense of community in our class, no matter what the medium is, whether it's face-to-face, hybrid, or online, is really important. And community starts with you, because you as the instructor or as the librarian, whatever your position is, you need to be communicating commitment to the educational endeavor that you are involved in, and showing enthusiasm for your content, but also for the experience. So I think that we need to be positive. You know, if we are saying, well, this isn't going to work in an online environment, or this isn't going to work with hybrid, I think that that has an effect on students. And so being positive about the experience, even if it maybe isn't what we all expected, you know, a year ago when we were teaching, I think that we need to be positive. Throughout all of our presentation today, there are a couple of principles that we're going to come back to over and over. And one is organization. We need to be even more organized in a hybrid or online environment than we are in a face-to-face environment. Secondly is communication. We need to communicate clearly and consistently throughout all of our classes, even more so than when we are in face-to-face classes. One of the things that I have found is that the tone of emails and other communications is even more important to pay attention to when students are in an online or a hybrid environment, because as we all know, sometimes our tone doesn't come across in a written communication as we expect it to. And so it's very important that we pay close attention to our tone, and that we are very consistent with our communication. Thirdly is flexibility. We need to be flexible with our students who are, you know, maybe coming to us from a different time zone, or maybe work throughout the hours that they would normally be in class. And then engagement. We as faculty need to be engaged with our classes, with our students, very consistently, so that we're not just appearing, let's say, once a week where we're doing our video recording or in a Zoom meeting and then sort of disappearing. We need to be very consistent throughout the whole week. So there are lots of ways to build community, and some are small, some are big. We're going to talk about both, but first, a few small ways to build community. I think that building in check-ins and discussions about, how people are doing, things like, at the beginning of a Zoom meeting, saying, tell me something positive that's happened this week and tell me one thing you've been struggling this week. That way we are checking in with every student and hearing about things that are going well, and then things that maybe they need some help with, I think is a good way to, in a very small way, to build community.
So one of the most impactful things for me that came out of last week's presentation was the idea of a survival brain versus a learning brain. And I think that people felt that way across the board, it seems like. And when we started talking about this, I immediately thought about adult learners. And so I want to take just a little bit of time to go on an adult learner tangent, which some people have heard before. Where to talk a little bit about how I created an environment for my students where they could move more towards the learning side of the spectrum when they were in my course. Give me with the next slide. Thank you. So as you may already be able to tell, I like dealing in principles and characteristics. So here are the 5 principles of adult learners. They are autonomous and self-directed. They have foundations of life experiences and knowledge. They are particularly goal and relevancy oriented, and they are hyper practical. So for example, students would step foot on our campus and they wouldn't be there to sort of gain an education, they would be there to gain a career. So they were in my class because they wanted to be a nurse. So they thought that having to take an anthropology class or a sociology class was like this extra kind of fluff that was taking away from their goal of becoming a nurse. When really, I think we all would argue that it's those other classes, in addition to biology and chemistry, that are important for making a nurse. You need to be able to talk to people. You need to be able to understand culture, those kinds of things. So I spent a lot of time trying to convince my students why things were important. And that's, I think, something that we're going to have to do a little bit more of this semester and this year. So the moment our students stepped off of campus for spring break last year, many of them stopped just being a student. They had to step into caretaking positions, or they had to provide financial support for their family. And these changes aren't going to go away just because they're back on campus. So to put it most simply, we're going to have additional competition this year to win our students' attention. You can have more than one priority, but when school falls too far below your second priority, it becomes difficult to be successful. And one of the, like I said, I think one of the things we're going to have to do is explain why on a level we've never really had to. The most surprising thing I encountered in my first year at a liberal arts college was when I asked a class to do an activity and then they just did it without me having to like sit there and explain or try and like, nudge them into doing the activity. They just like went for it. And I think that when you're working with students that are more in that survival brain mode, you oftentimes have to spell out why you're having them do what they're doing. And you have to have, in some cases, a good enough argument for them to care. This also helps you to like boil down your courses into the outcomes that are most important so you can focus on them more. Can I get the next slide, Haley? So community is going to be increasingly important this coming semester. Many of us are going to have far less time to build a community, and in a lot of ways, the stakes feel like they've never been higher. And in my opinion, community is made up of a strong bond and a shared purpose. And both aspects allow us to, us as instructors and our students to identify with the group. So when I am building a class, community is one of my overarching goals. There are other outcomes that we need to reach, but more than anything, I want my students to know that they are a part of my class, they're a part of my like crew, but they're also a part of our campus and they are important and they can they have something to give to our campus. So next slide, please. Thank you. So Michelle started talking about this, but there's some small actions that you can do. And the way that I'm kind of thinking about them are like connection and reconnection points. And I think that these points are going to be particularly important this coming semester because we can't always rely on the 5-minute chats you have before you come into class and you actually kind of settle in. I'm assuming that icebreakers are dreaded by everybody and not just librarians, but I do think that librarians have a particular hatred of icebreakers. So I've decided to rebrand icebreakers as these connection and reconnection points. Can I get the next slide, please? And so we have come up with a list of these activities that are a little bit more, they're low-key activities. You don't, in a lot of ways they might seem silly, but I want you to try not to think of them as like silly or a waste of time, but instead like a moment of decompression for your class and a moment of like reconnection. So one of my favorite activities that I have ever come up with is probably one of the easiest activities I've ever come up with, and it's the random word lightning round. And it was born out of my attempt to get my students ready to present their final projects. So my students were incredibly nervous about presenting to a class of like even their 15 peers that they had worked with for the entire semester. And so what I did one semester is I would have them do this activity maybe 3 or 4 times throughout the semester, and everybody in the class would have a chance or would be forced to, depending on how they were looking at it, to stand up, and they would give me a number. I had a list of 100 random words, and they had to talk about that word for a minute. Sunshine, friendship, anything. And so that was it was kind of stressful, but it was also bonding because you bond when you make it through a stressful moment. And sometimes I would have to give like prompting questions. And particularly, I would say particularly with international students, I would have to like give kind of a nudge of like, well, what do you think about friendship, or who's your best friend, or whatever. And it's some of my favorite class memories were sort of born out of this activity, and students at the end of the semester felt much more comfortable kind of taking command of the front of the room because they'd already done it so many times when they had no preparation. This could also, I think, easily be translated to a Flipgrid sort of activity, which is a video website that we are going to talk about a little bit later. But you could have students like respond to others, or you could have a word of the week or something like that. Another activity that I really like that's a small but semester long kind of connection point is the favorite song activity. So on the first day of class, I ask everyone to write their favorite song on a 3x5 card. And then at the beginning of each class period, I play one song as students settle into class. And we try to guess whose favorite song it is. And it's a really good way to learn something about students. And it's something that really matters to them. And it provides this connection point for the other students in the class. They may know someone by name, and they know that they live in the same dorm, but they also have this like secret knowledge that that person loves Miley Cyrus too. And that's like a good way of getting to know each other. And I think you could translate this to your like Moodle or Canvas site through an announcement. I was also thinking you could have like a Google slide presentation that just you keep building on it throughout the semester, or a discussion board post, those kinds of things. That takes 3 minutes out of the week.
I wanted to share with you a couple of things that I've done in my classes. Haley, if you wouldn't mind going back, thank you. And the first one that I have dubbed the Pet Parade really happened naturally in my Zoom classes this last semester, because as I think probably everyone who is here in this room has witnessed, there are guests into our classes that are furry, cats and dogs and other creatures. And I'm a huge animal lover, and I just took great pleasure in seeing my students, cat walk in front of them or something like that. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to take advantage of it. And so I said, if anyone wants to, share their pet with us at the, at the beginning of next class or at the end of next class, grab your kitty or your puppy. And I have a dog. And so I had my Josie with me. It was just a playful and funny way to come together as a community. We asked each other, what is your dog's name? And of course there were some hilarious names. And it was a very bonding experience that I had with all of my classes. So I really enjoyed that. The other thing that I think that we can do is we can be attentive to where people are geographically. This probably is more in an online environment instead of a hybrid environment. But if we have students, although we could do it with a hybrid as well, if we have students who are all over the country or all over the world, we can use the whiteboard tools in Zoom, or we could do it in your learning management system, let's say Google Classroom or Moodle or whichever LMS you use. And you could post a map. It could be a Google map or it could be a static image of a map, and ask students to pin their locations. And then I would take a screenshot of that, post it in my learning management system so that throughout the semester, we know where each other is. So that if something is happening in that location, maybe there's a natural disaster, maybe there's something in the news that's happening in that location, we can make that connection to the student and check to see if they're all right. We can, just do sort of mundane things like say, I heard it's terribly hot there, those kinds of things just show an understanding of our students' lives. And we take advantage of the actual, in both of these, both Pet Parade and mapping our locations, we're taking advantage of the online environment, things that we wouldn't normally be able to do in our classes. Then I wanted to talk to you a little bit about course structure. My students often remark that I really am into structures and organization, and so this feels very comfortable to me to talk to you about how I structure my classes. I do think that our learning management systems are more important in this new world that we're in than they were previously. And I'm going to share with you on the next couple of slides how I've kind of converted my face-to-face learning management site to the online one. But before we get to that, I just want to mention a couple other things. I think that it is especially important in a hybrid or online environment that we keep the syllabus and especially the calendar, our course schedule, updated and consistently distributed. I email and I put things into the learning management system, and I do that for every single thing that I update or send out. So students always are able to find where the most updated calendar is. There is another workshop planned for how to add contingency planning into our syllabi and how to connect learning outcomes with activities and assignments. So we're not going to talk to you a lot about that. We would encourage you to go to that workshop that's later in the summer. Then with assignments, this of course is just good teaching no matter what the environment, but clear written assignment sheets with rubrics. Do keep in mind that most learning management systems can accommodate rubrics within the grading function. And so, if you're using Google Classroom or if you're using Moodle, you can upload the rubric and actually grade within that system. I'm sure your instructional technologist can help you with that. And then a couple things with communication. Using consistent modes of communication lets students know where they need to look for messages from you. So one thing that I do is I use the same Zoom link for all of my classes and all of my office hours. The way I do that is through scheduling a recurring Zoom room is what I call it. So I call it my room. And so I just had one link throughout the whole semester. And anytime I needed to meet with a student, whether it was in office hours or maybe just on the fly that, you know, they needed some help with something, I just said, let's go into our regular classroom. And I also had that link in my my signature in my emails. I also had it posted, of course, on my learning management system, so that anytime they had any meeting with me, they had a consistent link. For the password, I kept it just a consistent password that was, that tied to our school. You know, maybe the school mascot is a reasonable thing to have. And having regularly scheduled office hours is, I think, really important, and continuing to remind students of those office hours is really important, because it's really easy for them to forget that. I also think that specifically asking students, you know, can you come to my office hours so we can talk about that more? It seems like you're not getting that one concept or something like that, might be beneficial, so that students are actually taking advantage of your office hours. So let's go to the next screen and take a look at how I used my learning management system. When I had a face-to-face class, my learning management system, and in this case, the screen that you're looking at is a Google Classroom page. It was very much a depository of information. If you look here at the bottom, I have handouts. And if you clicked on that, you'd see every handout I had given to the students in paper. And I always create it as a PDF, and I just drop it into Google Classroom so that if they lose their handout, they can get it in Google Classroom. I don't need to carry around extras in my binder. Like this 14th Amendment video was a 6-minute video I showed in class. If they maybe were missing that day, or they want to, you know, review it before an exam, they're able to watch that video again. And then readings, I have all of those linked to my readings are articles in this class, and I have them linked to the library databases, but the few that were not available through the library databases, I had PDFs of, and I had them in here. So you can see this is very much just kind of a dumping place. If you can go to the next screen, please, Haley. You'll see in this next screen, this learning management screenshot is of my class this past semester. And it's actually the same class, but you can see I organized it totally differently. And so I know there's a lot of text on the screen, but don't worry, you don't need to read every word there. I just want you to see kind of the chunks. So notice the first part. First of all, I organize it by week. So I give them a list of tasks per week. And my students told me they were checking things off as they did it. So, you know, I would open this, for this particular class, I'd open it on a Thursday because we had our Zoom class on Thursday mornings. And so right after class, I would put up the following week's lesson. And so I would say, for this week, do the following. And first I would always have the readings, and I always did these in the same order. So first they had the readings. Notice one was from the textbook. The second one, it was kind of an interesting story. I had a bunch of articles that the students were supposed to read. And in an earlier week, I noticed that the students had not read very well. And I said, what happened? Like, why did you not read this article very well? Because they were keeping up with reading. They were doing a good job, but this particular article, which was a really important article, they hadn't read very well. And they said, well, it was really long, and I don't have a printer, and it was really long, and I can't print that many pages because I don't know, I don't want to use up all my print ink and so forth. And so I discovered that short articles that were not really as substantial, they were willing to read on screen. The longer articles that were more research-based articles, they had a hard time reading on screen, and they didn't want to print them. And so I actually sent them, I printed and sent through the US mail, I narrowed it down to the few articles that I thought were absolutely essential. And then I sent them the articles that were ones that I thought they absolutely had to have in paper. So that's why it says I sent this to you in paper there. And then we'll talk about this in a few slides, but I had them working on a Google Doc, where they were collaboratively adding content to a worksheet. And then I had them watch a video, and then I asked them to post in their discussion board. One thing to keep in mind is that I didn't just say, post in the discussion board and then expect them to find the discussion board. I actually linked the discussion board right here in my lesson. And so that is a capability in Google Classroom. It's a capability in Moodle. It's capability in really is all of the learning management systems that I know about, and I know have used quite a few of them. You can grab a component like a discussion board from a learning management system, get a link and put it in another place like this page here. So students could just click on that link and go right to the discussion board instead of having to go out of this page, find the discussion board, and do their assignment. And then finally, the last of the chunks of information there are a couple of reminders. So I give them a reminder to come to class, and I give them the link. Remember, I always have the same link, so that link stays the same every single week. And then I have office hours, and I mentioned, you know, where they are and when they are, and again gave them the link. And so I do think that organizing our learning management systems by week, so that they have a set of tasks that they can get through during that week, is really beneficial. I only open up that week's lesson at the beginning of the week, and then we move on to the next lesson, and I open up the next week's lesson.
Okay, sorry, my mouse is a little touchy. So during the registration for this workshop, many of you kind of indicated a desire to hear more about facilitating online discussion. So here are kind of our pro tips for that. Just kind of a note, these are going to work no matter which platform you use. A couple of you did have questions about the best platform to use. I highly recommend getting together with your instructional technologist or somebody in IT, and they'll tell you what's available at your institution and kind of what they can support. So the first thing is starting significant topic threads yourself. So I don't know if you've ever been a part of a discussion board where you post a prompt and then students create threads for each response that they do. It's super confusing, kind of annoying. You have to like click through to read each thread and the response. So you can limit kind of who can create topic threads, and I recommend limiting it to faculty. The caveat to that is if you have a student designated to lead discussion for the week, you may need to have them submit their prompt to you so that you can post that, but that should work. I also kind of recommend having a thread for general questions or discussion and conversation between students. This is hopefully going to save you a few emails about, you know, how many words does that paper have to be? We're kind of getting repetitive emails. So if you have one place where you're posting answers to questions, other people can kind of see that, and maybe it'll save you a few emails. It can also kind of help keep other threads from going off topic because there's a space for students to kind of talk about whatever they need to talk about. As far as prompts, have really detailed prompts with a lot of questions, multiple avenues for discussion, opportunities for outside connection. So in like Google Classroom, for example, you have to post your response to the prompt before you can see other people's. And so when I first started using that, I was more likely to kind of ask questions that had like definitive answers. But then when I asked students to kind of go through and respond, it was really boring because they all kind of thought the same thing. So maybe questions that don't really have a right or wrong, but are kind of up for debate, or opinions that could be added in, keeps it from kind of going a little stale. So another tip is to provide structure and kind of stagger due dates. So if you teach Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, for example, you post your prompt on Monday. By Wednesday at noon, everyone needs to respond to the main prompt. And then by Friday at noon, everyone needs to have responded to at least 2 other posts. And that kind of allows time so that students who are kind of early birds don't have to say, I really tried to get my homework done, but nobody posted until like Friday at midnight and like I wasn't up then. That happens quite often. So staggering due dates is really kind of a key to creating discussion. I would also say that here you could kind of require a word count on your initial post or responses. So if you're noticing that you ask a really detailed prompt and students are giving you like a 3-sentence response and that's not enough, you could try saying, you know, these should be like a minimum of 500, 600 words. And that's going to kind of let students know what kind of level of detail you're expecting in their response. Also kind of encouraging students to use multimedia in their response if it's relevant. That's like the one benefit of being online is how easy it is to connect to outside resources. And it can really help people kind of understand difficult concepts. So here we're talking about utopia. I commented with a short clip from that episode of Charmed that talks about utopias. If I can connect that to my point, I think that can be kind of valuable. I also recommend deciding super early on if your students need to use formal writing. So I typically allow students to use more of a conversational tone, but I do require them to write incomplete sentences and indicate that like spelling and grammar should be taken into account. That being said, they can use words like I feel, etc. I think that kind of is more accessible to students. And then lastly, participate in discussion. So I don't think anybody has the expectation that faculty are responding to every post in a discussion board. Perhaps they do, but if you can respond to even a couple of posts each week, you're going to keep discussion moving and you can refocus things if it goes a little off topic. So you can try saying things like, hey, Kelly, when I read your post, I thought about this. Have you considered that? Here's an article I found that is kind of relevant to this point you made. All right, next we're talking about feedback and assessment. So it's really important in kind of these non-traditional modes that we are offering multiple places for feedback and assessment. That way, if we need to adjust or shift kind of midway, we can. So there are a few strategies that we offer for this, including entry and exit tickets. So these are like really short kind of questionnaires or surveys that allow for student reflection and they kind of help you assess learning outcomes. And they're entry or exit tickets because you take them either as you go into class or as you exit class for the day. So an example of this would be the critical incident questionnaire designed by Stephen Brookfield, which focuses on like critical concepts or actions from a course from the learner's perspective. So it's 5 questions: what most engaged you or distanced you as a learner, what action was most helpful or most confusing, what surprised you the most. So it's based on those questions and it kind of helps assess learning outcomes. There's also feedback that I like to use called 3-2-1 feedback. So it's 3 things you learned, 2 things you're going to use going forward, and 1 thing you still have questions about. So that's kind of how I use it in one-shot library instruction, but you could adapt the 2 things to maybe 2 things that you utilized in, I don't know, but you could do it. And it's especially kind of useful after a guest speaker. So mid-semester course evaluations, this is kind of just to say, don't wait until the end of a course to find out that something isn't working. Constructive criticism at the beginning from students about what is and is not working is valuable because you still have time to pivot to kind of have a successful course. As far as self-assessments, it's important to give students time to reflect about how the class is going, their performance, barriers to learning they're experiencing, goals they want to accomplish. These are things that you don't even have to read, but if you give students time to reflect, they might learn something and seek help if they need it. And then also we recommend conferencing. So Michelle kind of talked about using office hours to conference with students to talk about specific things in a class, but you could also kind of extend a personal invitation and just have a conversation. What's going on? How can I help you be more successful? That kind of thing. So that's kind of the level of feedback and assessment that students expect kind of in an online course.
Okay. Oh, is this me? Yes. Right. Yes. Okay. So activating, or one of the things that we talk about in a hybrid class is student ownership. And I think that student ownership also creates more sort of critical thinking moments. And I use this a lot when I'm engaging adult learners. We're kind of running out of time, so I'm going to zoom pretty quickly through some of this information, but you can always let me know if you have additional questions. But the way that I started to think about student ownership in a course was, how can I activate the expert? How can I build on my students' rich sort of prior experiences in order to empower them to realize that they are a scholar, they're important, and we can learn from them. So those were always the three things that I wanted my students to walk away with. So really quickly, any Beloit faculty that have had me in their classes may recognize this activity. It's the friend or foe credible resource activity. So when I'm introducing information literacy, I ask my students to find 2 resources, one that they trust and one that they don't. And then they spend some time reflecting on how they know a source is good or bad. And I also want them to think about and explain to me how someone new to that interest would figure out what resource was useful and which was giving bad information. And what my students discover is that they have this foundational knowledge of research because they do it every day. And we talk about how we're going to sort of translate these experiences that they have into academic research. And so that's an example of activating the expert. Additionally, this is kind of building on what Michelle and Haley have talked about, but my favorite online or hybrid courses asked me to take ownership of a week of content. And so in that week, I would be responsible for discussion questions or a lesson plan, and like maybe finding videos or making a video, and ensuring that like my fellow students were learning that content. And this was always incredibly nerve-wracking. But at the end of the week, I felt a lot of pride in what I had done. And I also learned that week's content really well. So these are 2 really small ways that you can activate the expert and help gain student ownership. There's a lot of other ways that are like very discipline specific, but they also have the added benefit of taking some of that pressure off of you for planning all of the content. Hybrid courses, you sort of do a lot of front loading. You do a lot of planning and explaining sort of to a T how things are going to go. And then you get to take a little bit of a step back sometimes as students work through that content that you've already created. Okay, next slide, please. So this matrix came out of a CLAC workshop a few weeks ago, and I think it's from an instructional technologist at Trinity, but it was a 3-hour workshop and I tried to find it again and I couldn't find it. But it's the idea of a contingency plan. So this is a useful way of thinking about how you need to change your assignments or activities based on different scenarios. So in some cases, we may already know that students aren't going to be on campus, or that you yourself won't be on campus. And in these cases, you can use these questions as like a guiding force for your semester planning. Which assignments do you need to tweak to make more friendly to students that are online? Those kinds of things. We have made a worksheet available at tinyurl.com/ACM plan. It's also going to be in the Slack channel. So you can feel free to download that and use it for your course planning. Okay, next slide. Sorry, Haley. So last week at the ACM workshop, someone petitioned for a movement away from using the phrases synchronous and asynchronous in favor of thinking about things in terms of high quality interactions. And sometimes these interactions are better served in real time, and other times these are more useful when students have time to devise their own answers and responses. So you're talking about a little bit about that in the chat, where students sometimes, based off of the topic, enjoy having a little bit more time to devise their answer. So next, we're gonna really quickly delve into a few examples of these types of interactions. Thank you. So next to discussion board posts, lecture recordings are probably the most familiar asynchronous tool. Recording your lecture and posting them accomplishes a few goals. First, it frees up your precious in-person class time to focus on discussion and ensuring that students really get the topic, but it also allows students to go back to the content for review. You can build these recorded lectures with some interaction to make it more engaging. Some screencasting software allows you to interrupt a video with questions. I use Camtasia for my screencasting, and it has this capability, but the downside with Camtasia is that it's not free. But YouTube has a way that you can add questions or polls. If you were to go down this route, you could leave the video unlisted and provide a link to students as well. Just keep in mind that YouTube is blocked in China. Another thought I had with familiar technology would be creating a Google or Microsoft form that students would follow as they're watching your lecture video and respond to at certain points. And that obviously you wouldn't be seeing those results like in real time, but you can look back at the form responses and see places that students really got what you were saying and areas that you might need to clarify. And Haley and I do this sometimes during instruction sessions. And so it's a really useful, easy tool. And students are familiar with taking a Google form. I wanted to mention a couple of alternatives to the traditional learning management system discussion boards. One thing that I did as a way to sort of prompt students into thinking more deeply about a topic was this idea of a memo to myself, which comes from a thing that I've always done, which I call Kelly's thoughts on things. So if something is happening in the world, or if I've read something and it's something that I want to spend a little bit more time engaging with, I will write a short essay about it. What did I think about this before, and how has my opinion changed? Or what questions do I now have? What else do I want to learn? And so those are the prompting questions that I would give my students. Another thing that you could use is a shared Google Doc like Michelle did, but you could also create a Slack channel for your class. This way conversation can happen 24/7, but you can sort of jump in at specific times also. This is another tool that many students are familiar with, and it has a low barrier for use. Another idea that came up at the ACM workshop last week was the idea of a reading buddy, where students are paired up for the whole semester and they sort of function as a support system for each other. And so you could set that up so that you have one student that's on campus and one student that's distance learning, or however sort of your class breaks down. But this way your class community exists on different levels and they're not entirely dependent on you. And we also mentioned Flipgrid earlier, but it's a website where your students can post responses to questions. I like it because you still get to see each other, but it still gives you time to formulate your answers. And in Flipgrid, you can create different groups, modules, chapters, whatever. It was designed for K through 12 students, but a lot of colleges are adopting it now. And there's an app. Yes, so the last thing I want to talk about is a WordPress site or blogging. So Haley has a lot more experience with incorporating blogging into the classroom, but it's a really good way to give students ownership and to create that conversation that will go on for the entire semester. One thing that I've just been noticing, like out of the corner of my eye in the chat, is a concern with having too many platforms for students, and that's absolutely a problem. We've already seen that students are becoming overwhelmed. So instead of trying to reinvent the wheel and incorporating 4 or 5 different types of technologies, I've tried to think about this in terms of how can we lean on the Google apps that students are used to and incorporate those in a more sort of interactive way while sprinkling in maybe 1 or 2 additional software that are easy to use and that students might be using in different classes. So I know a lot of people did like brief surveys of their students to see what platforms they had been using. So that's another thought as well, but it's something to think about. Yes, and faculty are overwhelmed with trying to learn new platforms too. So don't make it too hard on yourself. Keep it simple. I think that that's the easiest way, because if your assignments and activities are devised in a way that is like careful, your community will happen without like fancy technology. Okay.
We kind of just want to talk about kind of successes from last semester, what you plan to kind of implement from that into this semester. So if you had a synchronous class, but then you had to change really all of a sudden, kind of how did you handle the moment? What would you do differently? How can you build that into kind of your fall planning? So I think the final thing we wanted to do is just say, thanks for being here with us. We know that there's not a lot of time to plan, and kind of dedicating some of your time to workshops is a little bit difficult sometimes. But we hope that you took away one or two things that you can implement into your classes going forward that will kind of help students connect to the college, to each other, and to us. So we're going to continue this discussion on the Slack site and in our discipline-based groups on Friday. And that's where we're going to answer things like, how do we do labs? What do we do in studio art classes, dance classes? What does that look like? And I've already heard some great ideas in our breakout groups, so I think those can be really productive conversations. Here's our contact information. If there's anything from today or questions that you have about this topic that you want to shout out to us, you can email us here. We're really happy to respond. We really like this topic. Students are really important to us, and we're just happy that we can kind of be a part of this. So we hope to see you Friday. Otherwise, everything from today is going to be on the Slack site, and you can see it there. So thank you.